My psychopathic sister and her boyfriend broke into my home and stole everything from me, so I completely ruined their lives in return. I received a call from a hospital overseas informing me that my 18-year-old daughter had been hit by a drunk driver and had fallen into a coma. Without hesitation, I took the first available flight to be by her side. I spent weeks at her bedside, and during that time, my sister, who is a diagnosed sociopath, discovered I wasn't home. She saw this as the perfect chance for her and her ex-convict boyfriend to break into my house through the back door. Once inside, they ransacked the place, leaving nothing untouched. They stole all my precious jewelry, my $2,000 camera that I used for photography, and even emptied my daughter's childhood piggy bank. When I returned home with my daughter, I immediately noticed things were missing. As I walked through the house, it was clear that someone had rummaged through drawers and closets, taking anything of value: jewelry, electronics, cash. Nothing was spared. Overwhelmed with emotion, I broke down crying. I was already in dire financial straits, and this theft was the last straw. Checking the security cameras, I discovered it was my sister. I grabbed my phone to call the police. To give some context about my sister Sarah, she was always a troublemaker. When we were around 10 and 12 years old, our parents had left us alone for the evening, trusting me to keep things under control. Sarah had other plans. She found our dad's stash of fireworks in the garage meant for the 4th of July and decided she wanted to set them off in September. She tried to persuade me to join her, insisting it would be fun and that our parents would never find out. I told her it was a bad idea, especially since Mom and Dad had left me in charge. I warned her that we would get into a lot of trouble. Despite my better judgment, I let her go to the garage and light the fireworks. I sat in the living room watching TV when I heard a loud boom coming from the garage. I ran to the garage and saw her running towards me as multiple fireworks burst out of just one firework. The garage filled with smoke. I grabbed her and pulled her into the house, slamming the garage door shut. We waited until the rest of the fireworks went off in the garage, unsure of the damage done. Sarah had a grin from ear to ear and exclaimed, "That was totally wicked." Her fun was short-lived. The neighbors called our parents, who rushed home in a panic. I knew we were in for it, but before I could say anything, Sarah claimed she was innocent and that it was all my idea. She insisted that I made her do it. I stood there, stunned and speechless. Sarah's lies were so convincing that our parents believed her. I took the blame and was grounded for a month while Sarah got off with a stern warning. That's the kind of person she was and still is. When the police arrived, they took my statement and assured me they would search for them. The next day, I got a huge surprise when Sarah showed up at my door, begging for forgiveness. She cried and grabbed my hand, saying that we were family and that she didn't mean for it to go this far. She always pulled this trick, acting remorseful when caught and promising it would never happen again, only to repeat the cycle weeks later. I felt so betrayed but knew I couldn't let this slide. However, later that day when I was alone, I thought about forgiveness. I wondered if refusing to press charges against Sarah would make her truly understand. So I decided to let Sarah off the hook, but not Jake. Speaking of Jake, the police quickly arrested him as he had several outstanding warrants. The case went to court, and with the clear evidence against him, he faced the consequences. I won easily. Jake was sentenced to jail, and I hoped that would be the end of it. I thought that Sarah would appreciate what I did for her and that this would be the one time in her life she would truly understand how lucky she was not to face the consequences. However, much like a disillusioned believer, I came to regret ever turning the other cheek. Sarah's anger and resentment towards me grew each day. She blamed me for Jake's imprisonment and vowed to make me pay. What started as petty online harassment soon escalated into a full-blown one-sided war. One morning, I stepped out to get the newspaper and noticed my neighbors giving me strange looks. The woman next door avoided eye contact and hurried back into her house. I shrugged it off until later that day when I received a call from another neighbor. He said that my sister had been going around telling the neighbors that I was mistreating my daughter. She claimed that she was the one who had to help her while she was in the hospital because I would leave the house to be with men. She said I often neglected my daughter and asked her to come watch her at the hospital so I could have my freedom. My neighbors all knew that my daughter was in the hospital because of the accident, and I thought they knew I was literally in a different country with her, but apparently not. I was stunned. Sarah's lies were ruining my reputation in the neighborhood. A few days later, my car was vandalized. The tires were slashed and the paint was scratched with curse words. I stood there, staring at the damage, feeling utterly betrayed and overwhelmed. I couldn't decide if I felt angry or helpless. I knew it was Sarah. But without proof, there wasn't much I could do. The harassment continued. I started finding threatening notes left on my doorstep. The first one was simple but chilling. "You'll regret this." Each note that followed was more sinister and personal. "You can't hide." Read one. Another said, "You'll pay for your mistakes." I started to feel unsafe in my own home. I couldn't sleep, constantly listening for any sign of Sarah in the house. The nights were the worst. Every creak set me on edge. I installed security cameras and changed the locks, but I was still worried. One evening, I heard a noise outside and rushed to the window. There I saw Sarah, her face twisted with anger, trying to smash the windows of my living room. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. Every day, I feared what Sarah would do next. The police were sympathetic but said their hands were tied without concrete evidence. All I could do was document everything and hope it would be enough to stop her madness. Not only was she harassing me at home, but she also harassed me outside my home. She would call me at all hours of the day, and since I didn't respond, she left nasty voicemails and sent threatening messages using a random phone number app. Sarah's harassment reached a new level one night when she set a fire in my garage. The flames roared to life and started to consume my house. This woman was trying to kill me. I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of sirens. I ran downstairs to see what had started it, and as I got to the garage, I saw the flames consuming everything in their path. I saw Sarah running back to her car and speeding off. A huge grin spread across her face, the same one I saw that night she set off fireworks in our garage. The fire department arrived just in time to prevent the fire from spreading to the entire house. I gave the police the footage from my security cameras showing Sarah committing the arson. This time, the evidence was undeniable. Sarah was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including arson, harassment, and breaking and entering. The trial was swift, and Sarah was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to several years in jail. With Sarah and her boyfriend behind bars, I finally felt a sense of relief. However, I couldn't shake the sadness and betrayal that lingered in my heart. My own sister had turned against me in the most vicious way imaginable. It was a wound that I knew would take a long time to heal. I visited Sarah in jail, hoping to understand the reason behind all this. During our conversation, it became clear that Sarah's actions were not just the result of jealousy and anger. She was deeply mentally ill. I already knew she was suffering from antisocial personality disorder, but her inability to empathize or feel remorse had enabled her destructive behavior. Tears formed in her eyes as she told me that she never wanted things to end up like this. Even though she seemed genuine, I couldn't help but feel like this was the same Sarah who cried to me every time she got caught and would say anything to get out of trouble. I left the jail with a heavy heart. I realized that I might never have the sisterly bond that I'd always wanted, but I also knew that I had done the right thing by standing up for myself and protecting my daughter. As time passed, my daughter Ella's condition remained uncertain. I didn't mention this at the time, but she went to stay with my best friend for the time being because I never wanted her to potentially have to deal with Sarah herself. She had severe brain damage from the coma for a long time, and even after my sister had been imprisoned. I didn't have the heart to tell Ella everything. I told her to focus on recovering at the moment. She knew roughly what was going on, but I tried my best not to overwhelm her with information. The day I was able to bring her back home, knowing Sarah was behind bars, I was beyond grateful. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future seemed a little brighter. But then, just as I thought things were looking up, and as I helped Ella settle into her room, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. I picked up the phone and heard a lot of noise in the background. The person on the other end called my name. It was Jake, Sarah's boyfriend. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't understand why he would be calling me. I asked him what he wanted, and he said he needed to tell me something important about Sarah. He revealed that he knew from the beginning about Sarah's plans for me. She had been plotting this for years, wanting to ruin me, and he claimed he had proof. He then offered to testify against her, but he needed something in return: help with lowering his sentence. I realized he had been out of the loop for too long and was trying to use me as a pawn. I told him that Sarah was already in jail and his plan to get out of jail faster wouldn't work. He then said he could ensure that Ella and I would be safe from Sarah forever with the evidence he had. I ended the call, refusing to be manipulated. Jake cursed me and hung up. I looked over at Ella, who was resting peacefully, oblivious to everything. My mind was racing. As much as I hated the idea, Jake's offer was tempting. If what he said was true, Sarah's actions were premeditated and her vendetta was far from over. I needed to protect my family, and if that meant working with Jake, would it be worth it? As the days passed, Jake's offer kept gnawing at me. I decided to follow my instincts and not take his offer. Instead, I began my own investigation. I needed to uncover the full extent of Sarah's plans and ensure that she couldn't harm us. Agini reached out to an old friend, someone who had helped me during the initial phases of Sarah's harassment. A few days later, Mark contacted me with some news. He had been digging into Jake's background and his activities while he was in jail. It turned out Jake had been involved in some shady dealings even from behind bars. He had been manipulating the situation to his advantage and maintaining contact with some of his old associates. The evidence showed that he was trying to set me up. If I had taken his offer, I would have walked into a trap. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the extent of Jake's intentions. He had been plotting to frame me for additional crimes that Sarah had planned. Even behind bars, they were a dangerous duo. The plan involved pinning the blame on me, making it look like I was the mastermind behind some of Sarah's actions. Mark provided me with a folder filled with documents and transcripts of conversations between Jake and his associates. Jake had been using me as a pawn, trying to save his own skin by throwing me under the bus. With this new information, I decided to confront Jake. I visited the prison and demanded to see him. As I sat across from Jake, I laid out the evidence I had found. His initial smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise and anger as he realized his plan had been exposed. The authorities were now aware of his attempt to frame me and added more time to his sentence. The battle wasn't over, but I was more prepared than ever to face whatever came next. My focus now was on rebuilding my life and creating a safe environment for Ella. With Sarah and Jake incarcerated, life slowly began to return to normal, but the scars of the past events lingered. I took additional steps to ensure our safety, reinforcing the security system and joining a neighborhood watch. I also sought counseling to cope with the emotional toll of the betrayal and harassment. Through therapy, I found ways to process my feelings and regain a sense of normalcy. Ella's recovery was nothing short of a miracle. Though she had a long way to go, her spirit remained unbroken. Her strength was the reason I woke up in the morning and was my motivation to keep going, even on the hard days. We celebrated each milestone, no matter how small, and found joy in the simple moments that we had once taken for granted.